It's remarkable how quickly your perception changes when you strip away the background noise of human life. In the city, you don't realize how insulated you are, not just physically, but psychologically. You are surrounded by people, infrastructure, and systems designed to keep reality at bay. You live in a constant hum of activity. Sirens in the distance, buses braking, muffled conversation from the apartment upstairs. Those sounds create an invisible net of safety, without ever really thinking about it. That you're not alone, but in the countryside, especially the deep countryside, the kind where your nearest neighbor might be separated from you by miles of unlit road, that net disappears. You begin to realize how much of your confidence, your sense of control, was never really yours. It was borrowed from proximity to other human beings. When that proximity vanishes, something ancient in you wakes up. Your nervous system stops outsourcing its vigilance to the group and starts doing the work itself. You notice every creak in the wooden floorboards, every rustle in the grass outside, every change in the air pressure when a door shifts slightly in its frame. Now, there's a kind of romanticism in that. People who move to the country often talk about getting back to nature or finding peace. But they don't realize that nature doesn't negotiate with you. It doesn't care about your comfort. It's indifferent. And that indifference can be terrifying, because once you understand it, you begin to ask yourself a simple question. What would happen if I needed help right now? And the answer, if you're honest, is no one's coming. That realization doesn't just produce fear. It produces a shift in your relationship to reality. You start to sense that you are not the center of the world, but a small, vulnerable creature in a vast, unobserved wilderness. The first few nights in a truly remote place can feel beautiful. The stars look like they've multiplied, and the quiet feels like an invitation to rest. But stillness, like water, can turn on you. What was once calm becomes oppressive. You start to hear patterns in the stillness. A far-off sound you can't identify takes on disproportionate importance. This is what psychologists sometimes call hypervigilance. It's the brain's way of preparing for threats by expanding its attentional field to notice anything unusual. In evolutionary terms, that's a survival mechanism. In modern terms, it can drive you halfway to paranoia if you're not used to it. In the countryside, you don't have the constant reassurance that strange noises are harmless. In the city, if you hear something crash outside your window, you think probably a drunk guy knocking over a trash can. Out here, your first thought is, what is that? Who is that? How close is it? Introducing Daniel's story, that's exactly what happened to a man named Daniel who, in 2014, left Chicago for a small, inherited property in rural Montana. I've spoken with him more than once, and even years later, he describes those first nights with a mixture of wonder and discomfort. The first few days, he told me, I thought I'd made the best decision of my life. I'd sit on the porch, just breathing in that cold air, listening to nothing. And then, after about a week, I realized it wasn't nothing. There was always something. I just couldn't tell what it was. The sixth night was the turning point. He woke up at 2:13 a.m. He knew the exact time because his old digital clock glowed on the nightstand. At first, he wasn't sure what had woken him. Then he realized the silence felt wrong. It wasn't empty, it was expectant. Then came the sound. One single crunch of gravel from somewhere near the gate outside. Now, in the city, Daniel would have ignored it. Maybe even gone back to sleep. But out here, with no one else around, a sound like that isn't background noise. It's an event. He lay there listening. Nothing followed. No second step. But the sound had been deliberate, heavy enough to distinguish from an animal. After a minute, curiosity, or maybe instinct, drove him to get up. He pulled back the curtain and looked toward the gate. The moonlight fell just enough to outline the fence post. It was still. But there was something wrong. The post cast a shadow across the dirt, and next to it, there was another shadow. Narrower, slightly taller. But nothing was standing there. Daniel told me he stood at the window for nearly a full minute, trying to rationalize it. A trick of the moonlight. A tree branch. But there were no trees near that part of the fence. He decided to grab his flashlight. As soon as the beam cut across the yard, the second shadow was gone. He almost let himself believe it had been his imagination until he heard it. 2 slow, deliberate steps in the gravel. This time from the side of the house. The fear that hit him wasn't sharp. It was heavy. Like his body suddenly understood something his conscious mind hadn't yet processed. Whatever's out there doesn't want to be seen. And here's the deeper point I want you to understand. Isolation changes your relationship with fear. In a populated area, fear is something you can outsource. You hear a strange noise, you check the peephole, you call someone, you convince yourself it's fine. Out here, you don't have that luxury. Fear becomes something you manage alone, and that makes it sharper, more immediate. That night, Daniel didn't call anyone. He couldn't. No service. He just stood there, holding his flashlight, waiting for the next sound. It never came. But the next morning, when he went outside, he found something in the gravel by the side of the house. 2 footprints, bare, human. All right, I'll keep going without breaking the flow until this section reaches the full 8,000 words. Building from where we left off with Daniel's story, weaving in deep psychological and philosophical exploration of isolation, and slowly letting the horror intensify so it aligns perfectly with the rest of your speech. When Daniel stepped outside that morning, the first thing that struck him was the cold, not the weather. It was late spring, the air was mild. This was a different kind of cold, the kind that sits in the pit of your stomach when your senses detect something your mind can't quite name. The footprints in the gravel were unmistakable. Bare feet, average in size, maybe belonging to a man in his 30s or 40s. The strange thing was the depth. They were pressed deep enough to suggest the person had been standing there for a while, not just passing through. He looked toward the fence. The gate was still closed. The padlock was still latched, which meant whoever left those prints had come over the fence or from the woods. But the nearest woods were nearly half a mile away. Daniel tried to reason with himself. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe a prank. But even as the thoughts formed, they rang hollow. The land here wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into by accident, and people didn't walk barefoot through rocky soil in the middle of the night. He spent the rest of the day checking the perimeter of his property. Every fence post was intact. No damage, no forced entry. Yet something had crossed that line. Here's what's important to understand. When you live in an isolated area, you don't shrug these things off. You can't. Because out here, there's no cushion between you and the unknown. In a city, a strange incident gets buried under dozens of other daily stimuli. Out here, it stands alone in your mind, like a single candle burning in a dark room. And the human mind doesn't like unresolved mysteries, especially when they feel personal. So it starts working overtime to solve them. Every creak of the floor becomes a possible clue. Every shift in the wind feels like a warning. Isolation does something else too. It turns your imagination into both your best friend and your worst enemy. In the absence of information, your brain will supply its own. And because our species evolved in dangerous, unpredictable environments, the scenarios it generates tend to skew toward the threatening. For Daniel, the days after the footprints became a kind of psychological gauntlet. He found himself double, checking locks, closing curtains earlier than usual, keeping the porch light on all night. He even caught himself listening for patterns, counting how many seconds passed between the coyote howls in the distance, noting whether the wind seemed to be blowing toward or away from the house. That's what true isolation does. It sharpens the edges of your awareness until they start cutting into your peace of mind. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, Daniel woke at 3:07 a.m. The moonlight was weaker, hidden behind thin clouds. He didn't hear anything at first. What woke him was the smell. It was faint but unmistakable. Damp earth mixed with something metallic. He lay in bed, inhaling slowly, trying to place it. Then came the sound. Not footsteps this time, but a slow dragging noise, like something being pulled across gravel. Daniel got up, grabbed the flashlight, and moved to the window. At first, he saw nothing. Then, at the far edge of the yard near the gate, the beam caught a shape. It wasn't human. Not exactly. It was low to the ground, hunched, moving with a strange, uneven rhythm. For a moment, he thought it might be an animal, but then it stopped moving and straightened. Whatever it was, it stood upright, and then it turned. There's a difference between seeing something and being seen by it. When your eyes meet, when you know that whatever is out there has become aware of you, something primal shifts inside you. Daniel said that moment froze him to the core. The flashlight beam caught just enough to suggest a face, but not enough to define it. The eyes were reflecting the light in a way that wasn't quite right. Too bright, too direct. Then, in one slow movement, it stepped backward into the darkness beyond the gate. Daniel didn't follow. He just stood there, light trembling in his hand, listening to the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. Now, think about that from a psychological perspective. In a populated place, seeing something strange, especially at night, can be dismissed as a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. There's 1,000 ways to rationalize it away. But in isolation, your brain doesn't have those escape routes. There are fewer alternative explanations. You have to confront the likelihood that what you saw was real, because the cost of ignoring it could be too high. This is what I mean when I say that isolation changes the stakes. Out here, there's no quick help, no neighbors to knock on your door, no sirens. You're the first and only responder to whatever happens, and that changes not just what you feel. It changes who you are when you feel it. 2 nights later, the sound returned. This time, it was closer. No dragging, no footsteps, just breathing. Daniel heard it from the other side of his bedroom wall. Slow, measured, deliberate breaths. He didn't move, didn't grab the flashlight, didn't even reach for the window. He just listened, every nerve in his body straining to catch the smallest shift. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. In the morning, he found nothing. No footprints, no signs of entry. Just the silence of the land stretching out in every direction. A week after the first incident, Daniel packed his bags and left. He didn't tell anyone exactly why. He sold the property a few months later, never returning. When I asked him what made him leave, he paused for a long time before answering. "It wasn't the footprints," he said. "It wasn't the thing at the gate or the breathing. It was the way the land felt after, like it wasn't mine anymore, like it had noticed me." And that's the essence of the isolation effect. Out here in the deep countryside, you can't hide behind the noise of civilization. You can't outsource your safety. You face the world as it is. Vast, indifferent, and entirely capable of holding things you'd rather not know about. In that space, your mind changes. It becomes sharper, yes, but also more vulnerable. Because when something moves in the dark, and you're the only one there to notice, you're forced to face the truth that's always been there. Waiting in the silence, you are small, and the world is very, very big.